Riot. In the proper thing, they'll be inserted digitally by our head digital inserter.
You stick your finger where you want to stick your finger, mate. Leave me out of it.
Welcome back to Quiet Riot, a community of folks who love their political analysis with a side order of warmth and giggles. I'm Naomi Smith.
And I'm Alex Andreou. We're in this together. We don't opine at you, we think things through with you, and then give you homework.
And I'm the producer, Kenny, a formerly Welsh-residing resident Scot who now lives in England and has the envious task of keeping a Greek man and a Northern Irish woman in check. I deserve a raise, and I do take payment in all popular currencies.
So kick off your flip-flops, mix yourself an Aperol, and let us start a quiet riot.
On this week's show, as we rattle towards the Democratic National Convention, we're diving deeper than Tom Daley into US politics.
I'm wondering just how deep a black hole of $22 billion in government finances really is. Plus, we're bringing you 2 new regular features. We're benching Wokey Dokey this week because you've got an entire Olympics special Wokey Dokey at the weekend, so go listen to that if you need your fix of right-wing rage.
Instead, we will be sharing our recommendations on what to watch, binge, read, cook and listen to in a new feature where Naomi and I try to outclass or out-trash each other.
And we have a new agony aunt in the house offering relationship advice and broken heart comfort. And that's all the spoilers you're getting for now.
To help us with this cornucopia of transatlantic wonder, we are joined by our own regular transatlantic wonder, Professor, author, hunk, podcaster, Brian Klaas. Welcome, Brian.
That is the nicest introduction I've ever had. Thank you very much.
That's what I was aiming for. And to such luxurious surroundings. It's our first time in the Spotify studio proper. And we have our listeners to thank for that, because without these numbers, they would never let us in the door. Brian, before we get into our topics for today, I wondered if I could pick your brain a little bit on something. There have been warnings about foreign student numbers being just catastrophically low this year, and a number of universities are really struggling financially. What are you hearing as an insider, sort of from your sector?
Well, I mean, I think there's basically a catch-22 that the former government set up, which is that in order to deal with the loss of funding that comes from fixed tuition fees for British students,
Forever, it seems.
Yes, there has been a huge explosion in foreign student visas as a way to basically backfill that lost money. And so you have, on the one hand, the immigration numbers, and on the other hand, the finances of universities. And I will say that even though, I'm at University College London, I don't have any specific knowledge of the financials, but I think the universities that are most at risk are the ones that are not getting huge numbers of foreign students because basically they're getting hoovered up by the most elite universities. And so I think there's a real structural problem that it's sort of a ticking time bomb that the government has left in higher education. And it also creates
just the
problems.
one.
Well, it creates, I don't normally talk about this, but I do think there's a real problem that is going to be discussed by this government when they get a handle on how bad this is, that there are also problems in terms of admission standards where you need the money and the foreign students bring in the money. And so, I think that's something that's sort of the dirty secret of higher education in the UK, is that there are a lot of British students who are probably being discriminated against because they are not paying the fees that a student from the United States or China or Dubai is going to bring with them.
And the counterintuitive bit of it is that a lot of people think fewer foreign students means more places for Brits, but actually it means the opposite thing, because it's foreign students at the moment that basically cross-subsidize places for Brits. So fewer foreign students, weirdly, means even fewer places for Brits.
Yeah, and this is especially true in the higher education master's programs, where a lot of them have expanded drastically as a way for universities to basically deal with the funding shortfalls. And so, I mean, just one indicative example, and I'm not suggesting this is true across the board. But last year I had a class, a master's class that had 17 students in it, and 14 of them were from outside the EU, and I think one of them was British. So almost all of them were Chinese. And so, this is just a sort of snapshot of something that's changed even since I started teaching at the London School of Economics in 2015, where there's just a huge surge in these one-year master's programs where, a lot of people around the world want to be
cash cows.
Yeah, well, but they also, there's a huge number of people around the world whose lives are transformed if they have an elite British university on their CV.
Yeah.
And that's where the universities are tapping into that.
That's absolutely true of Greece. I mean, always has been. Even a non-elite university that kind of sounds quite impressive would do.
Brian, I also wanted to take a moment to reflect on the awful events that happened in Southport this week, not because we want any hot takes on any of it, but to just try and understand it. And of course, I don't know if anyone can ever really get accustomed to this kind of attack on children, but as an American, it might be fair to say that you have more experience of it than we do here in the UK. How can a community process this level of trauma?
I don't think there's any way you can, but what I will say, and this is sort of a weird form of optimism, is that it's good that it's traumatic, because in the US, the thing that has happened that you just sort of accept as an American national is that children get slaughtered in school and nothing changes. There's no reaction. Right. And that's with an actual attack where there's a policy solution, and many attacks don't have policy solutions. The school shootings do. There's this incredibly depressing dynamic that happens in, school shootings in the United States, where it's the same reporters that get deployed. They say the same things. The president's call, they do the grief and the processing, and nothing changes. And I think there's no answer to how to process something that is unprocessable. I mean, it's unfathomable what those people are going through. But I think that it's a mark of a healthy democratic society that this is national news. It is the most important story in Britain when it happens, and that everyone is trying to come together around it. I think is one tiny little silver lining.
When things like this happen in the UK, I just find myself saying, "Thank God we haven't got guns."
Yeah.
In any significant number. Because one of the things that does change after any attack in the US, as I understand it, is that the stock value of munitions and firearms goes up.
And more people buy them because they fear that there will be regulation, and there never is.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have said, after the Sandy Hook shooting, one of the most horrific attacks on children, they said if that wasn't going to change it, literally nothing will. You sort of look at the United States, and so I've naturalized as a British citizen now, as of like 4 months ago.
Giving up your guns.
Well, I'm still American, so but I don't have guns. But I will say that one of the things, when I would tell people that, they would say you've left one sinking ship for another. Of course, this was before the UK's big election, and people didn't have a sense of hope and so on. And one of the things I always said is, people in the British left often are really down on the state of the country, but the economy, I think there's reason to be worried, right? The government shortfalls, the economy, et cetera. But the social fabric of Britain is so much stronger than it is in America. I mean, people debate things in a largely rational way. They have a shared reality. The polarization is not full of complete vitriol. Conspiracy theories still exist, but they're not part of the mainstream political dialogue on a daily basis, right? And all this stuff, again, with violence, it's the same thing. It's like you can have an act of violence and everyone in the UK agrees this is terrible and must be stopped. Whereas, like Kyle Rittenhouse is a good example of this in the United States. This is a person who was basically, he took it upon himself to kill some Black Lives Matter protesters in a contested, we'll not go down the rabbit hole of everything that happened, but he killed 2 people. And he's a celebrated hero among the political right now. And, it's one of these things where you look at this and you're like, it's an insane sort of funhouse mirror of reality, where at least when trauma and tragedy hits in the UK, politics goes by the wayside, and people say, let's come together.
We are helped, I think, by the lack of this adherence to guns, must have guns. Yeah. And also, I think, the religion intrudes much less on our political life than it does in America, which is a great thing. But events following what happened in Southport would indicate a direction of travel that may be towards what you were
I'm in for a hot
describing. Well, and I think actually people need to, I think political leadership needs to take charge of this. It is eminently possible to trace the accounts that first basically started this wildfire, right? And there is legislation in place. I mean, this is classic yelling fire in a crowded theatre. Not even the First Amendment will protect this kind of rhetoric, disinformation that is intended to cause community division and civil strife.
This to me is the key: is that there's consequences. It's not politically rewarded as much in the UK, where yes, you may have people who are extremely irresponsible, but they face condemnation. They don't become more popular and ascendant and then become the new power in the country. I mean, that's the difference. And I think the sort of core of normal, decent people who hold politicians accountable when they're wildly irresponsible, that's a saving grace of a healthy democracy that thankfully Britain still has.
Could I just ask one question? You said it's not politically rewarding in this country, that sort of reaction. As somebody who's a relative outsider, do you think it's becoming more politically rewarding?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you're talking about. So in terms of growing a devoted base of zealots, yes, no question, right? In terms of winning power, no. And I think that's the difference, right? I think that, in the US, it is a winning political strategy to be Trump-like. And in the UK, I think there's ways to build devoted bases, which can be extremely lucrative, right? And they can make you very powerful and influential and so on. But they're not the pathway to 10 Downing Street. And I think that's the fundamental difference that is still very, very good in the UK.
Quiet Rioters, last week Alex and Naomi came closer than they ever have to hitting their target. Can they take home the gold medal for the week and 60 seconds this time, or will they stumble ignominiously into the very first hurdle and faceplant straight out of convention? Convention? Out of contention. I'm starting the clock in 3, 2, 1, go.
A photo of Olympic surfer Gabrielle Medina appearing to levitate over the ocean went viral, drawing comparisons with various magicians, Jesus and Ed Davey every single day of the election campaign.
Asked if she would have to raise taxes in the October budget, Chancellor Reeves confirmed that the Pope is indeed Catholic.
Britain recorded its hottest day of the year, and the Met Office responded with its traditional summer thunderstorm warning.
The new boss of the year's Secret Service said they still don't know why a gunman shot at The new boss of the year's Secret Service said they still don't know why a gunman shot at Donald Trump, still don't know how he got the gun, how he got into position, and still don't know if anyone will be fired for their failures. But he didn't know that he'd lost sleep since the shooting.
The killing of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in an airstrike further threatened to push the Middle East crisis to new levels.
Tourists in the highlands were warned to look out for swarms of insects, while in Venice, Santorini and Barcelona, insects were warned to look out for swarms of tourists.
The Olympic triathlon was postponed because of sewage in the Seine. A Bermuda Team GB member said, "Where I train, the water's fine if you can chew it."
A strike over pay for refuse collectors could leave Edinburgh filled with rubbish during this month's arts festival. No change there then.
France has revealed that a lobster dinner for King Charles cost the presidential office £400,000. That included one glass of housewipe but no tip.
New figures show fewer than half of young people now watching traditional TV, preferring TikTok, YouTube and, hello listeners, streaming services.
Stop the clock, Kenny.
Just don't even say it. Let's just move on. I don't want to hear it.
Since her announcement to run for the presidency, Kamala Harris has narrowed the polling gap, boosted campaign coffers by more than $200 million in her first week as presumptive nominee, 2/3 of which came from first-time donors. One voter registration group said it had signed up 100,000 new voters in the 5 days after Biden withdrew, the vast majority of whom, I believe, upwards of 80% were under 35. In just a couple of weeks, the presidential race has changed from an almost certain win for Trump to being neck and neck, and all with 95 days still to go. But what is her route to victory, and can she really do it?
Brian, we last spoke the day after someone took a shot at Trump. Incredibly, less than 3 weeks ago, that was, it feels like a year ago. And we were both quite skeptical of the chorus of voices saying, that's it, the election is over at that point. But are we getting similarly over-enthusiastic now? We know Harris is polling neck and neck with Trump on a national level, but what about that handful of swing states that really matter?
Well, there's new polling out as of yesterday, overnight, that is very promising. That she's basically closed the gap in every major swing state and has pulled ahead in some of them. And I think, I will say, you can't forecast American politics. It's incredibly volatile. Obviously, we have a different candidate than we thought we were going to have, only a few weeks ago, and so on. But I will say that I'm more optimistic that Trump will lose than I have been in a very long time. I think this coalition that's coming together around Harris is powerful. I think it's enthusiastic. And I think there was this sort of latent enthusiasm that she's tapped into, where there's a ton of Americans who are tired of Trump, but just want someone that they can root for who they don't think is in the twilight of their political career.
Yeah.
And she's just opened the floodgates for that. And I think the enthusiasm around her candidacy, maybe the first woman president. I mean, there's so many different things that are coalescing, and her path to victory, I think, is a very straightforward one now.
Yeah, and I think psychologically, correct me if you don't think that, and obviously generalizations are always hit and miss, but it feels to me like Americans love being part of history. They love being, that electorate that cast the first vote for, And that seems to me to be working for her now.
Yeah, and I think this is something, I've thought about this. First off, she went on a major political rally, on Tuesday night at an arena in Atlanta, and it was packed. It was just packed, right?
And also, they wouldn't let her talk. Like, honestly, because I was watching it live, it took her about 10 minutes just to calm the crowd down enough to start talking.
Yeah, but I think your point about history is a really interesting one here, because I think, I put myself in the position of a historian, 50 years in the future. And the story of America, in a lot of ways, is a story of uneven progress, right? You sort of have things go forward, and then there's a backlash. So you have the civil rights movement, and then Martin Luther King Jr. gets killed, right? These sorts of things. And if you look at this period in history, I mean, there's a pretty easy narrative to stitch together, where it's Obama gets elected. You have this sort of symbol of progress. The backlash is Trump. You have this sort of statesman who sort of carries the torch for 4 years. And then you have a minority woman take up the position. I mean, that's a good story. It's a story that is one of hope and progress, and the sort of two sides of America, which, Trump represents and she represents, battling it out. And that is, it's going to be a generational battle. It's not like Trump will lose and then Trumpism goes away. This is something, there's a deep-seated difference in how Americans approach politics. But, as I say, I'm more optimistic that those forces of progress are on the path to victory. And Trump does look, sort of, he's, regardless of how old or how delusional or deranged he is, he's just sort of a has-been. I mean, he's been on the scene for so long. He's not interesting anymore. He tells the same jokes and stories, and she's, as you saw in the rally, exhilarating.
And saying we're not going back. As a campaigner, Brian, I know all too well the importance of having a rhythm and momentum and that drumbeat of building up and up and up. Candidates often get a honeymoon bounce. That's, I think, what we're seeing here at the moment. How can she keep it up for another 95 days?
I think there's a few things that I would say. One is, I was asked about her chances on the Today program, maybe, 30 days ago, 40 days ago, something like that. And what I said then, which I think has borne out, is that if you asked 90% of Americans to say one sentence about Harris, they could. If you asked them to say 2 sentences about Harris, they couldn't, right? And so,
I like that. And
so you sort of have this thing where when you looked at her net approval ratings, a lot of it was media concoctions. Oh, she's not very effective. Okay, like this line gets parroted back at you. And then she gets introduced, and her net approval has shot through the roof. I mean, one poll, she went from -17 to +1. I mean, that's a transformative change. So people are meeting her for the first time. A lot of people are sort of like, okay, we're now paying attention to who she is, what she stands for, and so on. That's very good for momentum, because you're not. It's not just the honeymoon. It's that actually now, okay, there's going to be a policy rollout. There's going to be a vice presidential rollout. I mean, 95 days is not that long, and you're going to have a news cycle probably for 2 weeks around the vice president. You're probably going to have a news cycle that rolls up into with the convention and the bounce after that. And then it's going to be barnstorming.
Yeah, and then you're into the campaign.
And early voting as well. I mean, in my home state of Minnesota, I think early voting starts in like a month. So, people will be casting ballots much sooner than 95 days from now.
In the election in the UK that's just gone, we saw hyper-targeting from both Labour and the Lib Dems. In the US, you've got, 7 key swing states where different messages to different types of voter are going to be needed, whether it's the white working class of Pennsylvania or the Latino voters in Nevada, Arizona, and things like that. She doesn't need to win all of those to inherit the crown, but which ones, in your view, offer her the most obvious route to victory?
Well, Pennsylvania and basically all the models is the biggest tipping point state. It's a big populist state. It's a lot of votes in the Electoral College, and it's very swingy. That's probably the most likely one. But the standard sort of trifecta that people talk about is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. In the mix is Arizona, Nevada, etc. My home state of Minnesota, there was a brief period, and this is what really scared me with the Biden stuff, was that where it was looking like that was a toss-up. And normally it's, the last time Minnesota voted for a Republican was 1972. So it's one of those places where it shouldn't be close. And so, there's lots of possible pathways to victory. I think the main thing is that they often do actually, even though you're right to point out there's different demographic forces in these different states, they actually do sort of move together.
Yeah.
It is more likely than not that she would win many of them as opposed to just, split them.
Yeah.
Because the momentum nationally does often project onto the states and the ones that are very close. So if there's a late break, where she goes up 3 points in the national polls, that bodes well for her in the swing states because they are not perfect reflections, but broad reflections of the national electorate.
Anyone who's been watching American network news for the last few days will know that the weird label, it just seems to have taken off completely organically as a sort of democratic attack on the Republicans, helped along, I think, by Vance as VP pick being just genuinely weird. Let's have a little listen.
That stuff is weird. They come across weird. On the other side, they're just weird.
Convicted felon, weird.
Every day it comes out Vance has done something more extreme, more weird.
Listen to the guy. He's talking about Hannibal Lecter and shocking sharks and just whatever crazy thing pops into his mind. That is weird behavior. And I don't think you call it anything else.
It's not just a weird style that he brings. It's that this leads to weird policies.
You may have noticed Donald Trump has been resorting to some wild lies about my record, and some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
So, is it actually smart to pull back from they are Hitler, they are fascists who will make the states into Gilead, which in a way bigs them up, it portrays them as powerful, to something that actually diminishes them?
Well, I think you can do them in parallel. A weirdo authoritarian is a pretty good way of describing this movement, and a series of weirdo authoritarians. And I think that they're not backing off from the risk to democracy. They're not backing off in how high the stakes are for women with reproductive rights and all these sorts of things. But the weird comment, I mean, I've written about this previously, that a lot of the way that people in our world that think about politics every day, our biggest bias isn't left or right. It's that we think that other people are like us, and they're not.
Yeah.
Right? So most people don't think about politics. And that's why, this idea in sort of psychology, political psychology, is around this notion of a schema, which is this sort of like cognitive shortcut for how you interpret the overwhelming amount of information about a very complex world, which is politics. And the schemas that cut through are the ones that don't require people to come up with new ideas. So weird works because they are weird. It's just putting a label on something that everyone sort of thinks, but no one has put their finger on.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's a series of bizarre. The other thing that I think is like a really clear way of describing this is like, how many people do you know who are like Donald Trump, who never laugh, who always are narcissistic to the extreme?
Who are that color?
Yes, I mean, Or or the stuff with J.D. Vance, where you think that he suggested at one point giving more votes to people who have children, where the parents get the votes of the kids. I mean, it's bizarre. It's just utterly bizarre, right? And all this stuff about childless cat ladies run the world. I mean, these are strange things to say. And I think at some point what you're doing is you're just saying to voters, look, you've got a former prosecutor on the top of the ticket. The vice president is very likely to be either a former astronaut or a former teacher. Those are people that maybe you don't recognize astronauts, but you aspire, they're sort of aspirational figures.
The moon landing was faked anyway, Brian. You know this.
But like the teacher, right? I mean, like the first audio clip, and it's the origin of the weird sort of meme, is Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, who's on the short list, and I think is one of the most likely picks. And I mean, he's a former teacher. He's a high school teacher. He's just a normal guy, and I think this is the kind of stuff where at the end of the day, a lot of people do vote based on, do I think these people care about me? Are they sort of like me? Mm. And the greatest trick Trump pulled was, the guy's got a golden toilet, and he made the working class think that he was just like them and that he cares about them, and they couldn't be further from the truth. So.
It takes me back to a piece I read in the New Yorker maybe a year after Trump was first elected, and someone had travelled sort of Trump country and spoken to loads and loads of people who have voted for him. And the thing that kept coming up, and it's really stuck with me, is that they kept describing Democrats as words people. They are words people. We're not words people.
Well, anti-intellectualism.
Not necessarily anti-intellectualism, just there is a sophisticated way of describing the world in complicated ways. And weird kind of goes against that. Weird is a word that someone like that gets. Mm. They can go, yeah, they are a bit weird.
She is quite dependent, though, I think, on a lot of these new voters, many of whom are very, very young. They weren't turned on by the octogenarian duo running before, but many of them will care deeply about things like Gaza. Is that going to trip her up, or can she find a way through?
Well, the polling seems to suggest that she is not getting sort of burdened by that as much as Biden was. And some of that's because, she's not in charge. Mostly what we've been seeing is a total reversal of soft numbers for young people who I think ultimately, are worried about a lot of the things that Donald Trump is standing for and will change about American politics.
Well, on that, we've had a listener ask us a question, and Gozy87 sent us a message to say, what is Project 2025? And are they seriously suggesting the state should track women's periods to uncover illegal terminations? Say it isn't so. This sounds terrifying.
Yeah, so Project 2025 is a 900-page document from a right-wing outfit called the Heritage Foundation. And it has a series of sort of policy proposals, which is a right-wing fever dream that is very authoritarian. And a lot of it is deeply unpopular when people find out about it. Some of it has to do with reproductive rights, but there's also things like trying to basically turn the American civil service into a more partisan and loyal outfit for executive power, increasing the power of the executive to not be checked so that the president can do a lot more things. And, it's become such a problem for the Trump campaign that actually in the last 2 days, they've pushed out the sort of director of Project 2025.
Who's they?
So the Trump campaign basically has put pressure on them. Actually, it's funny because
so Trump can't distance himself from it and be in control of who is.
This is and J.D. Vance wrote the foreword for the president of the Heritage Foundation's book, which is just leaked as of yesterday.
Wow!
Very enthusiastically endorsing the Heritage Foundation president's book. I mean, the Vance was a huge problem for the Trump. It is a huge problem for the Trump campaign because he's pretty full-throatedly endorsed Project 2025. But what they're trying to do, I mean, it's really ham-handed because what they're trying to do is they're trying to say we have nothing to do with these people. Meanwhile, it's exclusively Trump staffers that are involved with this. Yeah. And also the memo they released publicly said that basically if people try to tie them to Project 2025, it won't end well for them. That was the verbatim quote. And it's like, you're an authoritarian political movement trying to claim you're not an authoritarian political movement, distancing yourself from a series of authoritarian policy proposals, and you're threatening them, saying it will not end well for you. I mean, it's like the rhetoric is even bizarre. But I think the problem here is that they actually have quite a radical set of policy proposals. And what scares me is that the number of people who understand that Trump 2.0 will not be Trump 1.0 is not large enough. Because the first time around, the sort of intelligentsia, if you will, around the Republicans didn't think he would win. Yeah. They didn't have plans. They thought, okay, we've resigned ourselves to Hillary winning. We don't know who's going to be on the short list. That's why the Trump people became the White House staff, because they didn't have this whole list of here's who's going to come in with Trump. They have a list of thousands of people they want to be made in executive appointments if Trump wins now. Yeah. They have a serious core of legislation they want passed, and they're prepping for it. And so that's why I think the Biden campaign originally and now the Harris campaign is really trying to amp up. Here's what Project 2025 stands for. And the more voters hear about it, the worse it is for the Trump campaign.
Could I just ask whether Project 2025 is useful in as much as it makes Agenda 47 look less crackpot, if that makes sense? Agenda 47 is the only official comprehensive and detailed look at what President Trump will do if he returns to the White House.
This is funny because Trump will never say something like Agenda 47 ever. And I watch what he deals with. So I haven't seen this official wing of his campaign. But I think that basically what you have with the disconnect between Project 2025 and Trump's agenda itself is that Project 2025 is the people who actually understand how the government works. And they understand the levers to pull and the ways that they can wrangle the legal procedures in order to actually make the things that the right-wing ideologues want to happen. Trump doesn't wake up and think about purging the civil service. Yeah. He just doesn't want to be told he can't do something. Right? He's a much more lizard brain sort of candidate, whereas Project 2025 is like, here's the strategy and the tactics. And
I mean, they're the equivalent of the people who handed Liz Truss her budget, basically, and said, this is the stuff we would like done.
I think that this is the thing that's truly, truly scary, is that they're lining up as a movement, and it's plausible that it would happen. I mean, especially because if Trump wins, the odds that the Republicans take the House and the Senate are it's totally possible. And they control the Supreme Court. Yeah. So they could really transform American politics for a very long time.
The other thing which seems to have Republicans really rattled is that whole Zoom call, insert group for Kamala phenomenon. Again, really popped out of nowhere. I haven't seen anyone saying that it's the Democratic Party leadership behind it. It just sort of started happening, and big fundraising Zoom calls basically anchored around a few celebrities supporting Harris, and especially the white dudes for Kamala call. It just sent Fox News host Jesse Waters into just paroxysm.
Now, I don't see why any man would vote Democrat. It's not the party of virtue, security. It's not the party of strength. It's definitely not the party of family. And to be a man and then vote for a woman just because she's a woman is either childish, that person has mommy issues, or they're just trying to be accepted by other women. And I heard the scientists say the other day that when a man votes for a woman, he actually transitions into a woman.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that's what the science says.
Science says that.
Weird.
So, with that in mind, Brian, and since you still have voting rights in America, how are you feeling
about your impending transition?
What the fuck is going on? Pardon my French. I mean, what are these people on?
I love
the scientists.
I know that's the first thing. The first thing I love. The scientists are like a uniform block, right? That just But it is,
and they're saying that if you vote for Kamala,
you turn into a woman.
You turn into a woman.
This is the stuff where whenever I try to explain American politics to a British audience, I always try to start by saying, you've only seen a sliver of how insane it is because it doesn't make international news. And you don't watch Fox News. So I always tell people, if you go to the United States, most British people who go to the United States go to New York or Florida or whatever. And I'm like, okay, you're not getting a real sense of the country. Make sure you turn on Fox News in your hotel room. Then you'll get a better sense, because there's just this craziness. I mean, Jesse Waters is someone who could not seriously appear on a primetime news network anywhere else in the developed democratic world. He's a lunatic.
Yeah.
And the stuff he says would get him shunned from any other sort of functioning democracy.
And he's moderate compared to some of the guests he has on. That also needs to be said. He had like a shock jock yesterday that diagnosed white dudes for Kamala as having low sperm count. Yeah. That was his genuine take. It wasn't like a...
Are we going to track that on the app as well as women's period cycle? That'd be... Yeah.
Well, you know what I do love about this, though, is that this is playing into everything that is the political problem the Trump campaign has, which is that they're going to lose women massively.
Yeah.
And speaking of history, what a great historical story it will be if Donald Trump's political fortunes end because of women.
Mm. Now, final question from a listener. We have Julia from Northampton. She wrote in to ask, I heard part of a Trump speech to Christians. He seemed to suggest if he wins the election, he will do away with the need to vote. Please reassure me that he misspoke and isn't seriously suggesting doing a Putin.
And again, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
What do you think?
Well, I don't think that we should give him the benefit of the doubt for a couple reasons. One of them is that we weren't born yesterday, and Donald Trump's statements don't exist in a vacuum. I mean, he already tried to steal an election with a formal plan to stay in power after losing.
Yep.
So and incited an insurrection to do so, and also told an election official to find him 11,000 more votes in Georgia. So the idea that he would try to do something nefarious around voting is not exactly a stretch. But the second reason that I think is worth keeping in mind is that there are people around Trump in his movement, et cetera, who understand that this is a political vulnerability. And they tried to give him an off-ramp. He was interviewed on Fox News by Laura Ingraham, one of his most devoted disciples. And she gave him the off-ramp. She said to him, "You surely didn't mean that there would be no more elections." And he didn't deny it. No. I mean, he had this meandering answer about how, no, it actually is the case that Christians won't need to vote again. And even if you take the most charitable interpretation of that, right, the most literal interpretation is that there will be no more elections. But the more charitable interpretation is still scary as hell, which is government policy will no longer be influenced by voters because I'll transform the state so much that Christian priorities cannot be overturned by future elections. Mm. I mean, that is also authoritarianism, right? Because the whole idea of democracy is that voting leads to policy changes. So there's no way of, sort of interpreting those statements that is good.
Sorry, Julia.
Yeah.
At the end of each item, we like to give our listeners some calls to action. And obviously, it's quite difficult with the American election because we are observers in large part. So are there things like, I don't know, Project Lincoln or Republicans Against Trump, is there ways to boost that to maybe even support them?
I think campaign finance laws don't allow that. So no is the short answer. What I would say is that if you have friends in America, talk to them, about the election, make sure they're voting, especially if they live in one of the swing states. I mean, the election could be decided by tens of thousands of people in a few states. The 2016 election was decided by about 80,000 people in 3 states. Mm. So, those are the things that I would say. And the other thing I would say is that you use the Trump phenomenon as a sort of clarion call in the UK to remember that, this is how bad it can get. And it's where you want to build up sort of rational, reasonable debate and really take seriously the insidious parts of politics where the crackpots are sort of knocking at the door and saying, we want to run the show. Because if you had told me that this was going to happen to the United States 15, 20 years ago, no one saw it coming. And it's now the normal part of American politics, and it can unfortunately happen with rapid speed if you get the right populist at the right moment.
Riot. This week we're benching Wokey Dokey. You got to troll with it and poll the other one to bring you 2 new features. Naomi gets substituted out for this one too. At Quiet Riot, we know that life is hard to navigate. Things are tough. Relationships are complicated, and we care deeply about the wellness of our listeners. So we've hired an agony aunt. She offers tough love, but that's sometimes what's needed to snap you out of a malaise. Joining us on the show, please welcome our new agony aunt, heading up our new column, Arlene on Me. Now, it's important to say this is not any famous Arlene, just our aunt, Arlene. Hello, Arlene.
Thanks for having me. I needed a new wee gig. The days have been awful boring lately.
Here's our first letter. Dear Arlene, last Friday night I got very drunk and spent the night with my best friend, Niall, for whom I may or may not have had wicked homosexual feelings for a while now. Looking back to my school diaries, it's probably not entirely platonic to always use a little heart as a diacritic for the I, Niall, but I digress. I was so drunk I cannot remember if anything happened. I think it might have, because Niall keeps sending me text messages that begin, "Hey BF." I am Catholic, and so it is vital to know, before my next confession, they take it much easier on impure thoughts than acts. Is there a test I can perform to find out if I am a gay now? Yours, Confused in Cork.
Oh, goodness me. Well, I'm not a Catholic, quite famously. I can only imagine the priest is going to ask you to say more than a few Hail Marys for having the impure thoughts, let alone any of the deeds that may or may not have occurred. I would say that you need to go and have a very long, hard think about whether this is the life you want to take and the path that you want to go down. I am a mother. I'm a daughter. And I cannot tell you the joy that I get from having children. And the dear Lord would want all of us to reproduce. However, with you being a Catholic, I would say maybe it's better that you don't. And God hates the sin, not the sinner. So as long as you abstain forevermore, and I would delete and block. I've done that many a time now with colleagues before in my previous job. Oh, don't remind me. I had to do an awful lot of that towards the end there. So delete and block. Don't be seeing them again. Try and live the good life. Stay off the drink. I mean, that would just be the devil's liquor there now, leading you down the path of no good and sin. So I would delete and block, stay off the drink, keep on the straight and narrow, and abstain. And any time the urge would take you, or any of them impure, dirty thoughts creeping into your wee head there, I would say just go and do something to distract yourself. There's all sorts of things you can do that are good and pure. You could take up baking. You could make some nice wee bread, wheaten bread, soda bread, potato bread, all lovely types of bread there you could be busying yourself with doing. And, you know, just don't be telling your mother what you got up to. God, you know, give the woman some peace. Make sure she doesn't ever find out about this. And yeah, I would hope that you would never be seeing Niall again. Let that poor wee soul get on with his life. You get on with yours. And don't be writing into me with this kind of filth, listeners. Can I just get something a wee bit cleaner next time? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aunt Arlene. We hope that's of some help. Confused in Cork. If that doesn't resolve the issue for you, try and see if you can find any old episodes of The Man from Atlantis with Patrick Duffy online. That seemed to clarify things for me when I was growing up. So, thank you. Quiet, Riot. Now, I have rarely seen such an angry exchange in the Commons as we saw this week on a matter of substance. There's been a lot of huffing and puffing on, you know, you said this, I did that. But this is actually a matter of economic substance. And Rachel Reeves seemed absolutely corybantic when she stood up in the Commons.
That's a good word.
Isn't it?
Can you spell it?
Corybantic.
It sounds like something you'd use to cover the shelves in your kitchen, doesn't it?
No, the Corybantes were the followers of god Dionysus in ancient Greece. They used to do a parade through towns, bashing their swords on their shields and making loads of noise.
A bit like the Orange Lodge.
And so it means basically when someone is angry and making loads of noise and simulating
Brian,
war.
every day is a school day.
Every day is a school day. So let me just play you the exchange, actually, because I think it will be helpful.
Her first budget will become the biggest betrayal in history by a new Chancellor, and working families will never forgive her.
The Shadow Chancellor had an opportunity this afternoon to admit what he had done, the legacy that he had left. But instead, he takes no responsibility. The word the country was looking for today was sorry. The Shadow Chancellor could not find those words. No wonder the party opposite so definitively lost the trust of the British people at the election 3.5 weeks ago. And we say never again. Never again.
The serious point in that is that there's been a lot of media coverage of it that is, I would say, agnostic. That says, governments always claim, they found things much worse than they thought they would. And there had been quite a concerted campaign, I think, from the Conservative Party to say, this is coming, just watch, they're about to do this manoeuvre, which would be equally true if they knew that this was coming, but it would also be true if they knew they'd left things in a much worse state than they did. Then as soon as they were out, they would start going, I tell you what they'll say next, that we left loads of hidden dead. So I just wanted to explore this with you. Is there a way to kind of remove the partisanship from a country's accounts? I don't mean to say the policy priorities should be done by someone independent, but that there is one set of figures that we can all agree on, basically, that there is less opportunity to hide stuff, to sweep things under the carpet for the next person. And especially the thing I wanted Brian to contribute to is because you have quite a long period between someone being elected and the other person still being in office. So how do you deal with that period? I mean, doesn't the outgoing president just go hell for leather to make things as difficult as possible for the person coming in?
Usually that doesn't happen because they're a lame duck president, and so they have almost no power. And the other thing that's different is that rather than being a government that sort of is in charge, you have the federal system with 3 branches, so you can't really sweep things under the rug. They get access to everything too, right, in Congress. So there's usually not the sort of, poison chalice or whatever left for the successor. And the big one was obviously January 6th, right? So which is rather a big one. But you do look at this. There's sort of this is a benchmark of how broken American politics have become. Is the letter that George H.W. Bush left for Bill Clinton is like a beautiful letter. It's like, you beat me sort of thing, but we're all on the same team, and I wish you the best, and give me a call. But it's much more eloquent than that. And so that to January 6th, we're like, there's no acceptance that he lost.
Did Trump leave a letter as the convention goes? No,
I don't think so. There was a joke, and I don't know if this was true, that they the outgoing Clinton administration took the W's off the keyboards in the White House when George W. Bush was elected. But it might be apocryphal as a sort of prank or whatever. But I think this is the kind of stuff where there's actually limited ability to do this because you don't have the purse strings. The one thing that they do, and this you'll see this with Biden as you did with Trump and every other American president, the pardons. There will be pardons, and the big question will be, is Hunter Biden pardoned? And I don't know the answer.
And a bunch of executive appointments I think Biden's getting ready for now.
Yes, but I mean, at some point, they, the ones that are confirmed by the Senate won't get confirmed by the Senate in the lame duck period. They'll just stop. For some of them, they'll try to push through as quickly as they can, but the Republicans have the ability to gum up the Senate somewhat when it comes to appointments. So it's there's not, because it's not such a unified force politically as a parliamentary system. There's only so much you can do, and it's why it's so important to have independent auditors and so on that just say, here's what the money situation is, and then let the politicians debate how to use it.
Which we now do. We have the OBR,
Yep.
the Office for Budget Responsibility, but
And the National
even
Audit
there,
Office.
even in the National Audit Office, although that's usually a sort of ex post facto exercise. So what do you think, Naomi? Do you think it was all a pre-arranged PR trick for Labour to excuse it doing unpopular stuff? Or did they genuinely find things worse than
Well,
they
I think
expected?
the OBR guy has admitted that, there are things that I should have been shown and seen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes, I think there is an honesty to what Reeves has put out. But look, I'm a management accountant and therefore have thought about and read about and researched a lot around performance management. It doesn't really matter what structure you put in place, people will game the system. So, yes, we have an independent Bank of England, yes, we have the OBR, yes, we have the National Audit Office, etc. But you will always have people that will try to game the system, fudge the numbers, conceal a bit of spending here is not really taking it from one department and giving it to the other, and blah, 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 blah. And we often have governments talking about, grand plans for this, that, and the other, and it's actually not new money, it's just kind of redeployed, and they'll try and claim that they're doing this wonderful thing to boost a certain sector when they're not really doing that at all. So I think she probably was telling the truth. That said, part of what I hoped she would do would be to come in and say, things are so much worse than we were led to believe, that I have to pull the lever of reducing trade barriers with Europe very, very quickly, and would seek to do more and bolder stuff on resetting that relationship with Europe.
Yeah, as you know, I am a little bit more cautious on that front, because I think to unilaterally announce that we've decided to be much closer to Europe again without Europe's sort of consent and invitation puts you in roughly the same bracket as Brexit.
They have made us an invitation, and the Labour Party, as it was in opposition at the time, turned it down.
Yeah. Yes, on particular things. But what I've been getting very, very strongly from my contacts at the Commission for the last actually 5-6 years is that there are certain conditions under which the UK will be welcomed back to the fold, even in a sort of customs union, single market, EEA sort of way. And they involve basically a political consensus.
They do.
Because what they don't want to do is say, OK, we'll let you back into the customs union, and then the next election, the Conservative government campaigns on the platform of taking us out of the customs union. And that is just a really traumatic thing for the EU to be constantly going in and out of.
Well, one of the things that we might see a reversal of if we get another Conservative government in a short period of time will be to reverse the cut to the winter fuel payments for pensioners. Now, I don't want to upset too many of our listeners. We have got the demographic data. I don't think many of you are drawing your pension at the moment. But you guys, what do you think about that proposal? I am pretty happy with it. Cards on the table.
I mean, the previous government made a point, I think, of quite consistently punishing particular demographics and rewarding the demographic that tends to vote for them. That said, whenever there is any kind of means testing, there are always people who fall just on the wrong side of the line, who will not be rich pensioners. Everyone seems to think that there are basically just two kinds of pensioners, those on the breadline and those who have gazillions. And it's not like that. There are loads of people in the middle who will struggle.
And loads of them are 25 and 35 and 45 and 55. We're all struggling with it. And is not the real issue the bloody cost of the fuel in the first place? not whether or not
Of course,
you're getting
of course.
some support from the government for it. And what we really need to do is tackle that. And I didn't hear enough of that in the debate around it, I don't think.
Yeah. But I mean, on the substantive issue, I think I've seen a lot of stuff saying it's the civil servants' fault because they sign off the accounts that they pass to the OBR. And so if they were hiding spending, they had a responsibility
To whistleblow.
to not authorize the accounts. But again, Monday, another huge allegation against Kemi Badenoch for bullying staff, three senior people having had to leave the department. We've seen that brutalization of the civil service, I think, a lot in the last few years.
Yeah.
So the idea that they can all just stand up to an elected Secretary of State, someone with a huge amount of power, and go, I'm not authorizing your accounts, you're lying or whatever, is to me quite fanciful. Because on a question of policy, they can always basically corner you. I used to work at the civil service. If someone comes to you as a civil servant and says, you don't need to worry about the cost of hotels for the second 6 months of this year because our Rwanda plan will be immensely successful. We will send thousands of people, and that will mean the numbers coming across in sort of undocumented ways will completely dry up. There's nothing you can say as a civil servant to counteract that if they insist that that is the policy outcome of their recommendation. So actually, it's really easy to hide loads of costs that everyone knows. These policies are for the birds. But if you insist that this policy will result in X thing, there's nothing you can do as a civil servant.
I think the big picture that I take away from this, though, is that we were talking about schemas before and how weird cuts through because it's true. I think the schema that a lot of voters have on across the political spectrum in Britain is that Britain is broken, right? It has been broken. Like the public services broke down, things don't work, the economy is not growing, etc. And at some point, I think Rachel Reeves' job is to be extremely clear-eyed and ensuring that goes away. That because people are actually, I think, one of the surprising things you see in the polling is people are willing to pay for it. They understand hard choices might have to happen. They understand certain people might lose out, and they're willing to do that if the broken side of things stops.
Yeah.
And they feel like the country is back on its feet, the public services work, the NHS is fine, the trains are on time. I mean, all that type of stuff feeds into it, and so the mistake would be to get bogged down in the smaller debates, when instead you have to be sort of laser focused on people elected you to fix the country, and they will go along with you as long as you can show them some results.
Yeah,
and I think that's sort of the question over the next few years.
As long as you're making progress,
Yes.
But with that, there has to be a kind of we have to be adults as voters as well.
Sure.
Rather than expecting that everything can be fixed.
Completely.
Yet that there are no trade-offs and everything can be fixed instantly. Now, a very simple call to action for you: write to your local MP. Write to them about
Probably a new MP.
Yeah, write to them voicing your support for a windfall tax on the profits of energy companies. You would be surprised how responsive, especially a new member of parliament, will be to receiving a large volume of letters and emails that say, I would quite like to see this happen. They are at their freshest and least cynical right now, so go at them.
Quiet, riot. Now it's time for our second new regular feature. From the sublime to the ridiculous, we wanted to share with our listeners the things that we've both been loving of late. And of course, we want your recommendations too, so do send them in. Whether it's something we've binged, be it food, podcasts, audiobooks, Netflix, a show we've seen, a beach we've discovered, or a Substack we're hooked on, we thought you might like to know how we fill our evenings and weekends when we're not clamped to a podcast microphone. Spoiler alert, we are both huge fans of horror and sci-fi as a genre, so there might end up being a fair amount of that, but we promise not to overdo it.
Well, next week is a shoe-in because we're going to see...
Alien Romulus at the
Alien
IMAX.
Romulus,
But also we need to give this segment a name.
Yeah. So working title is Play Your Time Right. And because playtime, you see?
Yeah.
And also because we want the game to become that either you or I throw out a recommendation and then the guest and Kenny try to guess if the other person will go higher or lower.
In terms of highbrow, lowbrow.
Yeah, in
Got
terms
it,
of
got it.
quality. In terms of quality.
But that's the working title.
That's the working title. And we invite our audience to write in with a better one because we invited Kenny to come up with a better one and he failed. We're going to start with you, Naomi, since you've foolishly publicised yours in the script. So,
Okay.
so what has been keeping you busy?
I love a good beach read, something really easy to get into, a total distraction from the topics that usually occupy my thoughts. And it's not a new book. I think it came out a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago even. But it is a stunning debut novel. And it's called The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. And it's one of those novels that flips between modern day and back in time. In this case, modern day City of London and the City of London in the 1700s. And it follows the lives of two women, one modern day, one back then, who, despite being centuries apart, begin to interweave until a 300-year-old mystery finally gets solved. It has got it all. Scorned lovers, women collaborating to punish men who have wronged them, detective work, and a huge big twist at the end. And I absolutely loved it.
Okay. So what do we think?
Brian, do you reckon he's going to go higher or lower?
Lower.
Kenny?
That sounds like a Netflix show to me. I don't think you can go any lower. You have to go higher.
I think it is being turned into a show.
Is it?
Not with Netflix.
I think it's decidedly lower.
Yes. Oh!
Because Amazon Prime have just, actually the Freeview bit of Amazon Prime have just released an entire new series of not Judge Judy. This is not Judge Judy because obviously for copyright reasons, it's Judy Justice now. Seriously. And it's like 150 episodes. It's like, it's endless. And I have it on in the background constantly. It is the best, lowest, most beautiful popcorn. I love Judy Shinglin anyway. I fantasize about her being my grandmother.
Weird.
Yeah, a little bit weird. See, we've come full circle. How do you feel about Judy?
She was a staple of daytime TV. When you're homesick from school, you watch Judge Judy.
Okay, snog, marry, avoid, Brian. Judge Judy, Oprah Winfrey, Ricky Lake.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Snog, marry, avoid. Probably marry Oprah.
For the money. Good call.
I'd probably snog Judge Judy.
You're gonna avoid dear Ricky.
Have you seen Judge Judy in a swimsuit?
Hot.
It is insane. Honestly, it's like you stuck your grandma's head on
a Baywatch model.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Anyway,
I would definitely snog Ricky Lake over Judge Judy. Let's be clear. I'm just winding you up. But
well, thank you very much, Alex. Listeners, let us know what you've been enjoying, and of course any instances of woke crimes that we can include when we bring
send in your relationship problems. You now know.
Well, indeed.
We have a very unsympathetic ear.
Indeed, yeah. So listeners, let us know what you've been enjoying, what we should call this segment, and don't forget to send in both your agony aunt questions, any instances of woke crimes that we can include in next week's Wokey Dokey, and you can do all of that by emailing quietriotpod@gmail.com.
And suggestions for higher or lower, if you think you can go lower than Judge Judy. No, sorry, Judy Justice.
Get
then
it right.
Send that in.
And that's it. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us again.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We look forward to having you back very soon.
If you're the social media type, please follow us at Quiet Riot Pod, and don't forget to leave us a review on whichever podcast platform you prefer. Rate us, follow the podcast, subscribe to it. All of this stuff really helps with the algorithm. And take a couple of moments and quote tweet the podcast itself with a few comments, because that really helps penetrate the Musk sphere.
Thank you all very much for tuning in again. We love you lots. Goodbye and see you soon.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou and me, Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canalou. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global. See ya!
For the lowbrow thing, I saw Twisters on Monday, which was.
I haven't seen it yet.
It is so bad it's good.
Oh,
It's like,
okay.
Is it Sharknado bad?
No, it's not that bad, but the dialogue is terrible. But it has everything. It's like the initial, the heartthrob is like a YouTube tornado chaser cowboy.
Brilliant.
Who turns out to be much more into the science than you think, and like it's.